a chance to participate if you want, or to actually see the slides that I'm going to be using in Genesis chapters 5 through 7. So before we get started, I'm going to ask Sean if he would say a prayer for us.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you've given to us. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to gather together and to study your word. We thank you especially for this opportunity since it's been a while since we've all been able to worship you. Thank us. We ask you to be with us as we study Genesis, help us to learn more about the beginnings of the world you created, how those beginnings affect us, and help us to learn from the mistakes and from the victories. We thank you for all that you've done for us. Thank you for watching after us. Jesus.
Amen. Okay, we've been looking at Genesis, and last week we were looking at chapter 4. Chapter 3 and chapter 4 talking about the origins, the beginnings of sin, and we're going to progress through the flood to where we have the degeneration of mankind that is a result of sin. But before the writer continues with that theme, he is going to interject chapter 5. And chapter 5 is about the descendants of Seth. And we're going to see a few things in there. I want to remind all of you, this is a survey. It's not a verse-by-verse study. And the idea is as you read through these chapters in your workbook, just kind of note down the things that stuck out to you that you thought were important. Now, you can do a full outline of the chapter if you want, or you can just jot down the verses that you either have questions about or you want to comment about or you think are really important for us to be able to see and to understand. And then also understand that what sticks out to you may not stick out to everybody else, right? And the things that I think are important or things that I might comment on aren't necessarily going to be things that you pointed out. So everybody can have something to offer in this, and we can look at these things. And in the course of our discussion, most likely we'll answer most of the questions that are on page 2 of each lesson. All right, here we go. Good deal. Everything up and running. All right, so we've got chapter 5 here. In a nutshell, what is chapter 5 dealing with? What's chapter 5 about? Genealogy, okay? Genealogy of who? Seth, primarily, right? It starts off with these are the generations of Adam, okay? And then it focuses in on Seth. Why does it focus in on Seth? Yeah, Christ is going to come through him. The promise is going to come through him. Abel is dead. Cain has gone out from the presence of the Lord. We don't know if they've had any more children at this point. It would seem as we read through the narrative here that Seth is their third son, their third child, the one who was appointed by God, that's what his name means, appointed, to replace Abel, whom Cain had killed. So we've got this genealogy. And what in this genealogy stood out to you? A lot of times we'll read through genealogies and it's just like, okay, so-and-so, 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 just repeats itself, okay?
And it talks about in chapter 4, verse 19, that Lamech took 2 wives for himself, one made him why at this point do you think God didn't step in and go, well, we don't want to start this now? Like, from what I can tell, this is the first time at least some of it is happening.
Right.
Why didn't God stop it when just a few chapters before he clearly made him like 23?
Right.
And then it just got worse and worse and worse as the elders went on. And if God was so against it, why didn't he stop it from the beginning of the start?
Okay. Anybody have an answer to that? Lori's saying, okay, here's Lamech, and then out of the blue, he marries 2 women. Okay? The inventor supposedly of polygamy. And if God didn't design man that way, why didn't God just say, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that, and put a stop to it? Anybody got an answer to that? At all? Man, I'm telling you, I really don't like teaching class from up here. I feel like I'm so far away. The only thing that I could offer for that is what the writer is recording for us in Genesis is Cain has gone out from the presence of the Lord. Okay? And a distinction is made between Cain's descendants and Seth and his descendants. If you take a look at the end of chapter 4, in verse 26, it says, and as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. So you have a picture of mankind just departing from God. Okay? And let me ask this question. Why doesn't God just put an end to man's sin right now? It's not according to his will. Because God gave us free will. God allows us to make our own choices, just like he allowed Adam and Eve to make their choice. And what the writer is doing is he is setting up this distinction here. Some people would take a look at Cain's descendants. He built them a city. It sounds like his descendants invented a lot of things. Some people talk about Cain's descendants describe more of an urban existence. Remember, the ground was cursed for his sake. He wasn't going to be able to grow anything. He was a farmer, right, initially. But then Seth and those who are going to come through Seth live a more pastoral existence. And I don't know whether that's a reasonable assumption to make or a fair assumption to make, but some people have made that. So as for why God didn't put an end to it, I think he just allows man to go his way, right? And he's going to continue to do that up to the flood, okay? And only at the flood is he going to intervene. And we're going to see why he intervenes here. Brandy.
I was looking at the line of Cain versus the line of Seth.
Uh-huh.
It looks like a completely different author has written it based on how it's written out. One has a total different way of defining how the lineage came about, and it doesn't identify any of the years that people were born.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is very specific, completely different in the way that it's written, and gives a timeline.
Mhm. Okay, very good observation. Why might that be? Okay. Generally, we say that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. I'm sticking with the same author. You have a lot of higher critics of the scriptures saying, well, there's multiple sources here. There's P, there's Q, they assign them letters of the alphabet. Okay. But I think there is a very good reason for the distinction between the verbiage or the way of transmission of the first genealogy of Cain and then the one of Seth. Anybody see why there might be a difference? What?
Because of Christ.
Because of Christ? Okay, that's very much a good answer. Also, what happens to Cain's descendants in the narrative after chapter 4? Or after chapter 4. You never hear him anymore. The only thing you hear is the increasing wickedness of man. Okay? And that increasing wickedness is going to include Seth's descendants as well. Okay? They're not innocent. But of Cain's descendants, Cain in an individual embodies a segment, a section, maybe the majority of mankind that just want nothing to do with God. Okay? And I think that's one of the great lessons we learn about Cain is Cain just says, I'm done with you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And you and I have run into people like that today, huh? We've run, friends, family even, I don't want to hear about it. They just turn their back on God. And so God leaves them to their own devices, so to speak. But with Seth and his genealogy, we're going to see this continuity that runs throughout the scriptures. And one of the reasons that the genealogies are so important is because they're constantly tracing the promise, tracing the lineage of Christ. And Luke is the one that sums it all up when he traces Christ's genealogy, not back to Abraham, but all the way back to Adam and then to God. Okay? So there's might be one of the reasons for the differences in the genealogies. Note the similarity of verse 3 to chapter 1, verse 26. In verse 3, it's talking about the birth of Seth. It says, and Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image and named him Seth. How is that similar to chapter 1, verse 26? How did God create Adam? In his image and in his likeness, right? So we have kind of a perpetuation of the creative process, if you will, here. We talk about human beings being made up of so many chemicals and so much water. And it's like we can get all those compounds and we can mix them all together. We can put them in a blender and everything, but can we give them the spark of life? No, right? You know, people talk about, oh, you know, you can clone or you can make test tube babies. You have to have living matter to do that, right? That's the one thing we can't do. And so here, I think, is the writer's way of just perpetuating this idea. It all started with God. It all comes through God. What did Eve say when Cain was born? I have gotten a man from the Lord. Okay? So I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. What's the key phrase of this chapter? Anybody got it? And he died, right? And he died. And he died. We always have a tendency to focus on what? Life, how long they lived. Well, you know, all but 3 of them lived over 900 years. And that's not counting Enoch, who was not, for God took him. You've only got 3 people in that genealogy that didn't make it to 900 years. You thought, wow, you know, these people are living almost 1,000 years. But that's not what God's focusing on. What he's focusing on is he died. And thus, the promise that God made, if they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is being fulfilled. Every single generation is being fulfilled. And we are the inheritors of that promise, if you will, because all of us have sinned. And so, we die. Okay? And so, that's the key phrase. That's what the writer wants to drive home for us. And he died. Notice verses 21 through 24, right? They present an interruption in the formula, okay? The formula basically stated in verse 6, Seth lived 105 years and begot Enosh. After he begot Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and begot sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years and he died, okay? And that formula is repeated throughout each generation until you come to verse 21. Who do verses 21 through 24 talk about? Talk about Enoch. Okay? Let's read them. Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. And after he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and begot sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Okay? What does it mean, Enoch walked with God? Obeyed. Okay? He didn't die. He's the only one in this genealogy who didn't die because he walked with God. Right? Now, what does that mean? He walked with God. He obeyed. He walked with God, so God took him. Take a look at Hebrews chapter 11 or verse 5, where the writer tells us a little bit more about Enoch. Over in Hebrews chapter 11 or verse 5. It says, by faith, Enoch was translated so that he did not see death and was not found because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. So walking with God, pleasing God. Also, Jude, verse 14, mentions Enoch. If you look at Jude 14, it says, Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints. So Enoch is talking about ungodly men. He's prophesying about ungodly men. So not only did he walk with God, he apparently was a prophet of God to the growing population, if you will. And so he walked with God. There's only one other person in the scriptures that says they walked with God. You better remember who it is. It's Noah. We're going to read about him in the next chapter. Noah walked with God. And as a result, he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And in verses 28 and 29, they present another interruption in the formula. And this is talking about Lamech and the actual birth of Noah. It says in verse 28, Lamech lived 182 years and begot a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. What's he talking about in verse 29? Because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. Yeah, that's right. He said, you are going to toil to be able to get anything from the ground. In Cain's case, God cursed Cain from the ground. And he told Cain, the ground isn't going to yield anything to you. To Adam, he says, the ground is cursed so that you're going to have to work hard to get it to produce anything. So what is Lamech prophesying here through Noah? What does Lamech mean when he says this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed? Anybody have an idea what he might be pointing to? Take a look at chapter 8. I know we're jumping ahead of chapter. But look at verses 20 through 22. This is after Noah and his family come out of the ark. This is after the flood. This is after God has destroyed everything in whom is the breath of life, except for Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 people, okay? It says in verse 20, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. Then the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. Although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth, nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. So it sounds like after the flood that Noah was able to survive because of God's grace, right? His obedience and his faith, that God removed the curse of the ground. That the curse that existed from Adam to before the flood was withdrawn. It no longer exists. Right? I mean, how many of you have thought about that way or seen that before?
Typically, if you want to plant corn, for example,
Right.
it's not going to ground.
Okay, here's the way I would answer that. Now, obviously, it takes work to be a farmer. It took Cain work to be a farmer, right? It took Adam work to be a keeper and tender of the garden, right? But look at how much and how relatively easy it is for us to produce things from the ground. I mean, sure, there's work involved, but I mean, it's pretty incredible, the things that you can produce with just a little bit of diligence. And so, I mean, we have corporate farms now that go out and they just produce multitudes of crops. And nothing like what's described really in Genesis. So Lamech says he is going to comfort us concerning our toil and concerning our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. So when you read chapter 8, verses 20 through 22, it appears that something has certainly changed about that curse. Okay? Are we still under a curse? Missy, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Oh, okay. Are we still under a curse? All of us are still under the curse of death. All of us are still doomed to die because of the sins that we've committed. But I don't know about the ground still being cursed or continuing to be cursed. So that might be something for some further study. Randy? What? Oh yeah, labor is still needful, right? Yeah. But wasn't labor needful before the curse? He had to keep and tend the garden. That implies labor, right? And so what? Oh, pain and childbirth, right? Well, those are women. No. I had to say that, right? You're gonna have to delete that video, Raymond. I don't know because all that Lamech talks about or prophesies about is the ground, right? And I don't know if God has continued the curse upon the woman because she was the instigator. I don't know. It would all be speculation, right? And so I don't want to get into anything that I certainly couldn't be confident about. So why did he call his name Noah? The name Noah means rest. Okay, he's going to give us rest. And we've already said, look at 8:20 through 22. So those are some of the things that I found in chapter 5 that I thought were kind of interesting or significant. Anybody else come up with anything that you got a question about or a comment on? Sean?
The name Methuselah means his death brings destruction.
Yeah.
And he died in the year of the flood.
Yep. Yeah. There are a lot of people who will take the names in this genealogy and they will attribute meanings to them. And that's kind of a tricky thing because when the Hebrews said a name meant something, it wasn't that was the translation of their name. It meant that their name was similar to something else. Okay? So it's kind of an iffy proposition. I've read things where people have taken all these names and they've built a step-by-step progression talking about how God is going to bring salvation to the earth just through their translations of the names. And that's kind of sketchy. It's kind of iffy. I think it's kind of reading things into it. Could it be there? I'm sure it could. But to my mind, not convincingly so. But yeah, Methuselah, I think when he dies, judgment, something like that. I've heard that before. All right, here is a graphic showing the length of years that these individuals lived, right? And what's interesting to note, Adam there at the top is contemporary with everybody on that list except for Noah. Okay? Lamech was born in 874, right? Adam lived till 930, so we got 56 years for Adam and Lamech to know each other, to compare notes, right? To relate, yeah, here's what happened. Of course, Lamech could certainly pass those things on to Noah, and then Noah, of course, could pass all that information on to his sons as well. So, we look at these, and that gives us 1,656 years between the creation and the flood when you base it on the genealogy in chapter 5. Okay, 1656. Was this genealogy complete? Or did they skip generations in here? And the reason I ask that is because look at the genealogy of Christ in the book of Matthew. Is the genealogy of Christ complete in the book of Matthew? No, it's broken up. There's one section where 3 kings in a row are left out. I think that this is a complete genealogy. But some people point out that it may not be because they don't think it allows enough time for recorded history. They say that Jericho existed as early as 7,000 BC. Okay, so that gets into archaeology and all that kind of business. So, take that for what you will. But the way God presents it, you got Adam, Lamech, Noah. So let's move on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a fun one, right? Got to ask this, who are the sons of God? Have any of you had this discussion before? A few times. What are the 2 options? Who are the sons of God? It says, verses 1 through 3, it says, now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his deeds shall be 120 years, or his days shall be 120 years. So, what are the 2 options for the sons of God? Okay? Yeah. Some people would say the descendants of Seth, or in his days men began to call on the name of the Lord. Okay? So the sons of God could simply be those people who retained God in their knowledge. They were conscious of God, and they walked by faith. Okay? What's the other option? Angels, right? And so, what is it? Is it men who believed in God? Such as, and many commentators will say, this is talking about where the descendants of Seth in weakness gravitated towards the daughters of men, or Cain, and they intermixed, and the influence of those wicked, wicked women, right, brought the world to its knees. Okay? That's one interpretation of it. Can we just summarily throw out the possibility of angels? Some people want to do that simply because it just seems so fantastic. But let me ask you this question. Wasn't everything up through Genesis chapter 9 incredibly fantastic? Wasn't it just not a world in which we live? Didn't Peter say the world that then was perished? I mean, it was incredibly different. We have no idea exactly what it was like. And that's why there's so much speculation when it comes to these first 9 chapters of the Bible. Because there's just so much going on there, you think, well, how is that possible? Or how is that possible? Okay. In Job chapter 1 at verse 6, the sons of God are described as angels. In Job 2:1, the sons of God are described as angels. In Job 38:7, says the sons of God sang with the stars, implying angels. Then we have two New Testament passages. The first one is 2 Peter chapter 2. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 5, Peter says, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood of the world of the ungodly." And so here we have angels who sinned in close connection with Noah and the flood. Then also, when you take a look at Jude 6, in Jude at verse 6, says, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain," so perhaps they left that domain to come down and have relationships with human women. They left their proper domain and left their own habitation. He has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Okay. So we've got those passages that seem to suggest that maybe the sons of God were angels. When we continue reading in chapter 6, it says in verse 4, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who are of old, men of renown." Okay. And wickedness just really starts to blossom in the world at that time. So I'm not going to say it was angels. I'm not going to say it was the descendants of Seth. I'm not going to say it was the descendants of Seth, and I'm not going to say it wasn't angels, right? The thing is, and this is what you've got to remember, and I want you all to remember this, okay? When we come up with something that, our opinions or our speculations may differ, whatever your personal opinion, it has no bearing on our salvation. Zero, zip, zilch, not a 9, yet none, right? And so it's just, wow, that'd be weird if it was angels. It seems like it'd be more realistically God-fearing men, right? Marrying godless women or the daughters of men. That seems to be the distinction that's being made. But I don't think that we can easily or summarily just dismiss the idea of angels, okay? The scripture said they sinned. Don't know how they sinned unless they interfered with God's creation. Randy. What? What does that mean? That's one of the questions in our lesson books. Okay, God says in verse 3, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." What is God referring to when he says his days shall be 120 years? Build the ark, be a preacher of righteousness. Okay.
I also heard that it's not going to go on
Yeah. In a sense, I've always felt like God saying, okay, I'm only going to put up with this for another 120 years. Then I'm going to destroy everything. And so if Noah, as we just read in Peter, is a preacher of righteousness, okay, he's a preacher of righteousness, and he's got to build the ark. And so I've always understood it. He's going to build the ark. Some people understand it that God is making a contrast here between the long lives they lived in chapter 5 and then possibly the maximum that they would live on earth. Okay, I'm not going to strive with man forever. I'm going to limit his lifespan to about 120 years, right? What's the average lifespan in the United States today? Isn't it about 73, 75? Something like that for a U.S. male? That's probably it. But you do read every once in a while somebody living at these outrageously long ages, right? 109, 110. And so, again, I think it's talking about, just like Lori says, from this point on, I'm going to give them 120 years. I'm going to give them 120 years to realize they need to get in that ark. Okay? God is simply not going to bring the judgment in an instant. He's going to give them time to repent or time to hear. Okay? So I think that's what that's dealing with personally. I want you to notice verses 6 and 7. The Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made man. What does this tell us about God? Something very important. How does he react to man's sin? Is this talking about anger? Disappointment. It's talking about grief. He's disappointed. He's grieved in his heart. He says, and I'm sorry that I made man. Has there ever been a parent who thought, I'm sorry I ever had children? Or I'm sorry I ever had that child? I'm sure Lori and Lance have said that at least once in their life. I'm just going, yeah. But he's probably thinking of Jackson. So God here is reacting like we can relate to it, like a parent. You know, our children can do things that hurt us tremendously, grieve us, cause grief in our heart. And we just think, oh, it would have been better if they had never been born, right? My good friend has 2 daughters who are no longer faithful. It would be better if they had never been born. And he'll tell you that it would be better if they had never been born. Because they've just come into this world to be sent away gone for all eternity when this short life is over. So I think it's important for us to understand that we have the capacity to hurt God, just like our children have the capacity to hurt us. You know, it is a very emotional bond. We are his children. And a lot of times we don't think of our behavior that way. You know, we'll do something, we'll get out of line or whatever, and hope mom and dad don't find out. Is there any way God's not going to find out? Behold, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding both the evil and the good. He knows. But then we look at verse 8. Judgment is coming. It's 120 years away. Judgment is coming. But with judgment, there's always grace. It says in verse 8, it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Okay? So how is Noah like Enoch? We talked about this already. He walked with God. In verse 9, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. Okay? Note the state of mankind at this time. We talk about man's degeneration and sin. In verse 5, it says, and the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And that suggests that not a good thought entered into their heads. Then when you take a look down at verses 11 and 12, it says, then the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. I believe that word corrupt is also translated destroyed. And indeed it was destroyed, for all flesh had destroyed their way on the earth. And that has a different sound to it, doesn't it? all flesh had destroyed their way on the earth. And he said, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So there's the state of the earth. Now, I've interjected some slides in here that are old slides, and I think you may have seen them here before, I'm not sure. But we just talk about the ark. God's going to give the instructions for the ark here in chapter 6, in verses 9 through 22. And so the size of the ark, 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. All right, what's a cubit? A cubit, about 18 inches. Typically, it's from here to here in the average size male. Okay, so we've got, that's the size of the ark. 450 feet by 45 feet by 75 feet wide. Okay, there was not a vessel of this size constructed until the 19th century. It had 3 decks, at the lower deck, upper deck, and an upper deck. Okay? So what we've got is we've got a volume of 1.518 million cubic feet. We have a surface area, all the decks, of 101,250 square feet. Okay? There's the size of the ark. The ark then had a capacity equal to about 567 railroad stock cars. Railroad stock car can hold 240 sheep. The ark could have accommodated 136,080 sheep. Why sheep? Because we're just taking an average size. Many animals are very, very small, right? There are relatively few large animals. The average size of an animal in our model. The number of species, according to modern taxonomy, is amphibians, 6,000, birds, 10,000, fish, 29,000, insects, almost 1 million. You got that right. Mammals, 5,400, mollusks, 70,000, and then reptiles, 8,200. Okay. By the way, all these figures are taken from a book by Henry Morris, who works at the Creation Foundation in California. One of the books is the Genesis Record. Another book is the Genesis Flood. And I want to tell you right now that all of these numbers are give or take. Okay? And I also want to tell you that there's a lot of speculation in this as well. So, of all these species, 17,600 would need to be on the ark. Okay? Genesis 6:19 says, take 2 of every kind. So 17,600 multiplied by 2 is 35,200. But Genesis 7:2 through 3 says, take 7 of every clean animal. So we would add 5 more of each clean animal for another 44,000, right? Now, some of your versions, the ESV, I think might say take 7 pairs of animals, but it will have a footnote saying or 7. There's no agreement there, right? The New International Version also has that footnote. So you add those numbers together, assuming that it's 7 clean animals and not 7 pairs of clean animals. That gives us 79,200. The ark could have held 136,080. So that means it was only 58% of the capacity of the ark. So we've got our decks, and it would be about that full. Okay? Now I want to tell you something here. Whenever we read about the flood, we read about the ark, the human mind wants to say, is that physically possible? Could that really happen? Okay? We want to explain miraculous events in ways that we can get a handle on them. Okay? And that's the purpose of Morris doing this and putting together all this information. And I remember once talking to a young guy who said, well, the Bible is just a bunch of mythology and fantasy and stuff like that. I said, really? And he says, yeah, take the flood, for example. Okay, there's no way you can get all the animals, in the world on an ark. Well, physically, given the numbers we have, yeah, you could. Not that it makes that much difference to me. There's also the understanding of animals. This is the European rock pigeon, Columbia livia. Okay, from this one genetic grandfather, if you will, over 300 species have descended from this one bird. From this one type of bird, 300 species of bird have come about. I'm not going to show you all 300. I just want to show you the incredible difference in all of these different pigeons that can be traced back to one common ancestor. Look at that guy. Dogs. There's a terrier. There's a beagle. There's a St. Bernard. That right there's a coyote. There's a dachshund. They were bred to hunt badgers, believe it or not. There's a fox. There's a hyena. You got a jackal there. There's a husky. There's a bloodhound. I don't know what in the world that is. I think that's a dog pretending to be a cat, right? There's a little pug. There's a wolf. And there's a little Yorkie, right? That's a Janet dog. So you've got all of the breeds of dogs are descended from just a handful of dogs, okay? There is a jaguar. There's a leopard. There's a panther. There's a cougar. There's a mountain lion. And there's a puma. Now, if we shuffled up those bottom three, could you tell which was which? But they all have the same genetic ancestor, right? So what I'm pointing out is God didn't necessarily have to put every single animal that we have today into that ark. Look at how many different, there's not a single one of us here that's identical. Yet, right? God allowed genetic diversity within his creation to be able to take place. And it has made animal species, it has made human beings completely different. So when we talk about, 7 of each of these, will actually just be 2 of each of these. It may have just been 2, period. Did the animals necessarily have to be full grown? God may have directed the animals to Noah. If you take a look at 6:19 at verse 20, some people will say, well, there's no way Noah could go out and round all these animals up. But in verses 19 and 20 of chapter 6, it says, and of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you. Keep them alive. So the indication is God sending these animals to Noah. Many mammals possess the potential for hibernation. And God is in control of the whole process. See, that's what sometimes we forget when we get so focused on could this actually take place. God's in control of the whole process. He can do whatever he wants. God could have put all those animals on the ark and put them to sleep immediately. We must remember that much, if not all of this, is theory based on some speculation. Okay? Because nobody was there. Well, there were people there, but none of us, right? And do we need to know how this was done any more than we need to know how God created everything with his word? Yeah, we talked about that when we talked about the 6 days of creation. About, well, how did God do that? And how long was that really? It's like God didn't feel the need to give us all the details, right? Those would certainly be beyond us. All right, a few observations about chapter 7. How did Noah's family benefit from his faithfulness? Take a look at verse 1. In verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, "Then the Lord said to Noah, 'Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation.'" Notice how the whole family is saved because of Noah's righteousness. Now, I'm not saying that these were godless people. Noah most likely would have taught them or had an influence on them. But because of one man's righteousness, 7 more are saved. Why does God command 7 of the clean animals to be taken into the ark? Anybody have any idea? Food, possibly? Sacrifice. I think most likely sacrifice. It says in verse 20 of chapter 8, "Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar." So there's the odd one out, if you will. What does God do at the very brink of judgment in verse 16? I think this is kind of significant. Noah and his family go in the ark, and he shuts the door. He seals them. He protects them from the flood that's going to come. The Lord shut him in. From where do the waters of the flood come, according to verse 11? 2 sources. The firmament, the heavens. Remember when he divided the waters from the waters? We talked about there being the waters above the firmament, the expanse. What's the other source? He breaks up the fountains of the deep, which suggests that there may have been very significant earthquakes at the time of the flood as well, changing the world. Peter says the world that then was perished. From above, from below. How long was Noah inside the ark? A year and 10 days. Verse 11 in chapter 6 says he goes in on the 17th day of the 2nd month. In chapter 8, verses 14 through 16, it says he comes out on the 27th day of the 2nd month, a year later. Right? And a year and 10 days, he's in the ark. And then explain verse 24. The last thing we'll look at tonight. In verse 24, it says, "And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. How long did it rain? 40 days. What does it mean the waters prevailed for 150 days? That word prevailed means had might, were strong, were tempestuous, right? Active, if you will, right? Storming. You look at the next verse in chapter 8, verse 1. "Then God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided." Okay? So it's like he calmed the storm. All right. I kind of like this format. I can hold you hostage for a few extra minutes. Next week, we'll go ahead and we'll get into chapters 8, 9, and 10.
Here you go, 450. 450. Way that you love. When I be lost in the sorrows of day, and the blessings find me with light. The way I belong, the song as a breeze, caressing the trees and
Good evening to everyone. It's good to see everyone here tonight. We still do have some that are staying at home because of the virus. Denny and Diane are not with us tonight. They're both having sinus congestion problems and they didn't want to take any chances. Sarah, we have been announcing that she was going down to Dallas for surgery. She had the surgery today. Austin reports that the surgery went well. There were no complications. Sarah's doing okay, but she's on morphine right now for the pain. And tomorrow they're going to be putting her over to the oral painkillers. So we'll see how that goes. And Austin says thanks for everyone's prayers on her behalf. Reminder, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Bible study here in the auditorium. We're going to be reviewing the chapters 1 and 2 in Philippians, and we'll have worship at 10 a.m. to follow. We've saddled Craig with extra duties, and so the internet Bible class on in the book of Mark is going to be just on Monday nights in the future. We had been having it on Monday nights and Thursday, but it's going to be strictly on Monday nights at 7 p.m., and that's using that Zoom application that we've been using on the internet. Remember, we studied tonight the book of Genesis. Genesis workbooks are in the back if you need one of those. Anything else we need to mention tonight before we're closed?
Just remember to keep the two I mentioned on Sunday, Alex Connor's upcoming surgery, heart surgery, and co-workers of mine, his nephew, Joshua Nye, and his struggles, his health condition. Pray for him to get that.
Okay, thank you. Kitty. Okay. Anything else? Okay. It's good to see everyone here. Stay safe. Wash your hands frequently. That's all I've got. We'll be closed in prayer.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for the day that you've given us. Thank you for being with all of us through the virus so far. Please continue to keep us safe. Thank you, or please be with us this week. Please help us to be good examples to the people that we come in contact with. Thank you for all of the blessings that you've given us, and thank you for sending your son to die on the cross for our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.